Okay, hello. Welcome to the Huddle Breakdown. Apologies for the sound quality. I tweeted out a little bit before we went live here, assuming that I didn't screw something up, and I did screw something up. So my sound is off, and I tried, as we're off about 5 minutes late here. It's my apologies, Alan, for the delay in trying to get my audio fixed. I failed miserably, so we're just going to kind of push on here.
You're off penalty kicks now, James. That's it.
Yeah,
You've had your
yeah.
chance. You're off
Well,
them now.
we've benched Enda. He's MIA again. He's off celebrating some birthday number that I have a distant memory of, somewhere in the 20s, I think, allegedly.
Wow.
So,
Black and white era that for me.
wishing Enda a happy birthday week. So he's off enjoying himself. I think he's even attending the game on the weekend. So anyone watching sees Endo carousing through. Hopefully he's sober and sober enough, and you can say hello to him. So just want to jump right in here. We're going to talk about the Livingston performance, and then have a little bit of a conversation about the Ferencvaros game later today. So I should introduce us. I'm James Allen from Celtic by Numbers. And so, Alan, what did you think? Kind of just broad strokes on. Let's start with selection. So I have my little list here. So I think that was a bit of a theme coming out of the game, given that Kyogo was rested and Abada came into the side, and there's been quite a lot of conversation about competition prioritization, that type of thing. So maybe we'll start with a little bit of qualitative discussion on those two topics.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a particular issue. I think one of the features of this match, or the aftermath of this match, has been the amount of cleverness after the fact that has gone on, really. And I think selection to me would be another one of those, because it's still a little bit puzzling that you put Juranovic at left back, given that we've got about 4 left backs now. But it's not a biggie to me. I think Bitton coming in was not a surprise with Rogic being injured. It was probably what we all expected to happen. And Abada for Johnson again. So I think, as I said last week, I don't think that Johnson took his chance when he was given a start the other day. I think he was very wasteful against Hibs and didn't create a lot with the opportunities that he got. So, Abada's performed well this season, so that wasn't a big shock. And okay, give Kyogo a rest and put Giakoumakis in. I don't particularly have a problem with that, to be honest with you. Again, Giakoumakis hasn't had that many minutes. It was, I think, his first or second start. Sorry, probably. And Kyogo's had a full season in Japan nearly, and has played most of the games since he's got here. So I don't have a problem with any of those selections, really. I couldn't make a big. I would be inventing controversy for the sake of it if I started to complain about it now.
Yeah, I guess some of the comments that I've read and heard people express is the amount that was turned over, meaning that the number of changes, and really the prioritization of competitions, meaning that I'm of a similar opinion. I mean, if we can't do some rotation against Livingston at home, then I'm not sure what game you're ever going to rotate. So I guess it's an issue of number of people rotated, and for me, the one that was probably the oddest, given the other options, was Abada, and that's more so with regards to how he's done over the last 2 months, more so than he kind of started extremely hot, and we've talked about some of the limitations in his game, but I didn't even have a big problem with that, because the way the game played out, some of his strengths as far as being more of almost like an inverted forward and a poacher getting into the box, and the number of crosses, which we'll get onto. We didn't have enough chaos in the box where somebody like him actually benefited from some of those poaching opportunities for whatever reason, it just didn't work out that way. But yeah, I couldn't get myself too worked up about it either, because the reality is, and I think Ange commented on this maybe yesterday in his pregame for Ferencvaros, is Kyogo is already well into a season. We've discussed on here the increasing issues with injuries. He's already been out for a month with an injury, so we can't just keep flogging these guys and expect them to not get hurt. And so you're going to have to rotate, and that comes back to competitions. So, some of the discussion, do you prioritize Ferencvaros over Livingston? And again, to me, it's a spectrum, meaning that, home against Livingston, and I have egg all over my face, because in this conversation last week, I was overly confident.
Yeah. I would even disagree that it was prioritizing. I think he just was shuffling logically. I mean, he was either responding to injury or just shuffling around the forward areas. Because, I mean, like you say, Abada's form dropped off. Johnson looked really good in small burst cameos as a sub, and probably deserved his start against Hibs, but then disappointed against Hibs. Now, if it had been me, all things being equal, I could have made a case for saying to Johnson, look, I'm going to put you in again, but you need to do better. And because I've got Forrest on the bench now, and I've got Abada wants to get back in, and I would have used that as a bit of a motivation for Johnson to up his game a little bit. That's a bit. I can't honestly think of anything else that I would have been violently opposed to. And as I say, to me, it was just the thought that you needed a bigger presence in the box. There might not have been the space for Abada's darting runs. Kyogo's darting runs, and that perhaps more of the battering ram would work against Livingston. Okay, again, it's easy to be smart after the event, but again, I would have bought that. I'd have accepted that and said fair enough. So right. Yeah.
I generally agree. It doesn't make for good content here, but the only other idea I had was more so not changing style of play, but looking at more, a different mix. And we've talked about this before, even not so much at Celtic Park, which I think is the more surprising aspect of all of this, is that this happened at home. But we've talked about it more so in the context of going to Livingston, or, prior going to Hamilton, or even away to Hearts with the smaller pitch, and how that tends to be a different style of a game as a result. Do you maybe alter your setup as far as something as if you're going to rest Kyogo, something as radical as playing a Jetty and Giacomakis with a 10 behind them, and that's a concept I've talked about before, which is if Livingston's going to pack the box, then maybe try to outmatch them with better athletes and better players, and just say, okay, this is going to turn to a chaotic mess in your box, then let's put our chaotic mess players in that into the mixer, as they say, and let's go to let's mix it up. But yeah, that would be more radical, as I've said before. I mean, I don't expect that. Who knows if it would work? It would be experimental. So yeah, So what do you think then, generally on the performance? Because I took some justifiable criticism. I used the phrases controlled and dominant, and the reason why I did that when I described it is I dominant in the sense of not that we were doing damage, but we completely dominated play, and to some degree that was because they allowed us to do that. I mean, that seemed to be their game plan. But generally speaking, how would you describe the overall performance, knowing that it was a timeline and that most of the action came in the last 15 minutes?
Yeah. So I mean, I think I described a couple of weeks ago how we reached a point under Postecoglou where we were having a level of dominance possession-wise and control of the game, but through sheer volume of having the ball, 70, 80%, 600-700 passes, right? which was akin to how Celtic got to under Rodgers, but we were being quite direct and creating chances at a level of where Lennon's team was successful. And it was that sort of happy combination of a lot of control and a lot of output, productivity as well, which is a really great place to be. And that looked to be the way it was heading, and it kind of came to a juddering halt. I didn't see it coming really on that. I know you've been banging on about the lack of chances created in recent weeks, and maybe this is, you would argue, is a culmination of that. But I still felt that I was happy with the balance between control and chance creation. The St Johnstone game I was kind of content with, because it was a case of being patient, and the chances did come the longer the game went on. And in this case, they didn't. So in terms of a performance, it was a real sobering one. In terms of, we'd built up good momentum. We could have gone top of the league with a win. That psychologically could have been important, because again, we're very conscious that over the last 18 months, Celtic have put absolutely no pressure on the Rangers at all, and not put them under any stress, and they've not had to respond to that. And when that had happened before under Lennon, they had tended to produce bad results under that pressure. So we wanted to put them under pressure to see what would happen, and then we missed that opportunity. So that was very disappointing. You still look at the data, and you still look at the overall performance and say, well, okay, 800 passes, 82% possession, 2.27 expected goals, 14 shots, etc. You still say we should have won the game, right? And he clearly had a huge chance with a penalty to do so. So, if we'd been sat here on the end of a scrappy 1-0 late penalty win, I think we'd still have been content, because the overall direction of travel would still have been generally positive. But what I think, when I looked at it and sort of think, what could we do better? Where did this really go wrong? And it comes back to what we've been banging on about all season, about where is the biggest risk in this team, and it's in central midfield, and that's where the biggest problem was. So in the first half, you essentially had Bitton sat between the two centre backs. Now, given how incredibly deep they were, and I'm talking the centre forward was defending halfway inside his own half, right? You've essentially got 7 against 10. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're trying to attack 7 against 10. And for those of us that have played the game and done these drills where you're playing defense against attack, that's incredibly difficult. If you're playing against 10 people who've got no care in the world to score a goal, and all they're trying to do is to stop you scoring, it's very, very difficult, even if they're relatively, average players. And no disrespect to Livingston, but clearly, they can only attract a certain caliber. Yeah. So essentially, we're playing 7 against 10. And if you look at, and I'm not picking on Bitton, because Bitton probably played the way that Bitton plays, right? He completed 110 passes, 116 passes at 96%. So there's absolutely no risk in any of those passes. Okay, he only completed 6 pack passes the whole game, which are taking players out of the game. 0 key passes, 0 chances created, 1 secondary assist, 0 expected assists.
Well,
so
I guess
essentially you're saying one of your 3 midfielders is not contributing at all to you trying to score a goal in any meaningful way. And then you've got what you've got to add on to that is, and I made a note of it as I was watching the game, 35 minutes into the game, okay, and Celtic are struggling to break them down. And between them, McGregor and Turnbull, who are your 2 attacking midfielders, have given the ball away once. Like 1 incomplete pass between them.
Right.
And you sort of think, that's great. They're really accurate. No, the point I'm trying to make is there's just no risk. There's not enough risk. And there's there's almost a bit of maths needed here to build a model. And this is probably more your bailiwick than mine. To say there's a balance, there's a model to be built between what's an optimum level of control versus an optimum level of risk. And Celtic went way the wrong side of that equation at the weekend from central midfield. And I remember the last 5 minutes of the first half, I think Turnbull tried a bit of a tricky through ball, and he gave the ball away. And that was about the first time either of McGregor or Turnbull had tried to do something a little bit different, tried to put a risk into a pass that they thought, this isn't going to come off probably, but you never know. Because the thing is, with a team like Livingston, who completed less than 100 passes in the game, like 80 passes, and they didn't look comfortable when they had the ball. And when they did get the ball, and your centre forward is 20 yards in front of you, and nobody's in the opposition half, what are you going to do? Are you going to try and play out? Well, you see, to me, there's almost a benefit to be had in giving the ball away sometimes and saying, I'm actually going to give you the ball now, deliberately, 5-10 yards from your own goal line, and let's see what you do with it. And I'm going to press you like mad and just create that little bit of chaos and uncertainty and madness. But on the other front, I think everyone would say that probably makes a little bit of sense. But what you saw in the second half was we tried to do that a little bit more, and we actually put a little bit more risk into our passing, not a huge amount, but a little bit more risk into our passing. And then what happened? What happened was you create more goal kick restart situations. So the goalkeeper takes 10 minutes to get the ball back into play. You create more throw-ins. They take an hour to take the, and so you can actually limit yourself badly by adopting that approach. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this isn't easy, right? This isn't an easy balance to achieve. You can't just and you can't just go the other way of just everyone throwing ridiculous passes and not just giving the ball away continually. That's not going to work either. So there is a balance to be struck, but Celtic quite clearly didn't strike it, especially in that first half. And if I look at the wide players, so you do see the number of crosses that Jota, that Ralston put in. You do see that Juranovic actually had the. Juranovic and Ralston led the team in most number of passes. You do see that Abada and Jota had the best packing scores in terms of receiving the ball, and that they did try and put in a number of passes. Although between them, they barely created. Well, Ralston created 3 chances, but Juranovic created none, Abada 1, and Jota none. So what I'm trying to say is that the wide players tried to put risk into the game, but they just didn't do it. They just didn't succeed. The central midfielders actually ended up. McGregor and Turnbull each ended up creating 3 chances each, which was the most in the team. But Turnbull's expected assists were mainly off of 1 good free kick or 1 good corner, and McGregor's 3 expected assists accumulated 0.112 of an expected assist. As in, yes, he provided an assisting pass, but they were very poor quality chances. So in summary, the central midfield failed to create and didn't take enough risk. The wide players tried to create, and Ralston did a really good job. And he was, I think, like you, I agree with you. He was easily the man of the match for me. But the other 3 could, they tried, but they couldn't create. They couldn't create anything, even though they did try and put some more risk into it. And then the way that obviously that Postecoglou sets up the team, the centre forward doesn't create anything. I mean, barely touches the ball actually in the game at all. And that's whether it's Kyogo or Giamakis, that is true.
Yeah, I think at least Y-Scout had Giacomakis at I think only 6 received passes. Yeah. Which again, to put that into perspective, when Edouard was being criticized for being uninterested, he was getting 16, 18, which was lower for him. When he was on his game, he was dropping into play and picking up 20, 22, 25. So I mean, even in games when Kyogo's done quite well, you're right. I mean, he's maybe getting on the ball 10 times when he's playing centrally. It's different when he goes out to the wing. But I mean, you're talking 8, 10, 12 touches as far as received passes per game. So they do damage when they get it at times. But yeah, generally speaking, they're not really involved.
But yeah, so for me, in summary, the problem was central midfield. And that's, we've been calling this out. That was the big issue. So to your point, it would have been better to have taken Bitton off and put another striker on and at least made it 8 against 10 in the final third.
Yeah, it's interesting. I used an analogy. So after the game, a gentleman named, he just died earlier this year. He's one of the great college basketball coaches of all time, a gentleman named John Chaney, who was kind of famous for turning boys into men. That was his. He didn't get the top recruits. He coached at a university called Temple, which is in Philadelphia, not too far from me. So he took good players, but not the top recruits, and would just turn them into one of the most and I mean this in a positive way, vicious defensive teams in basketball. And he'd play this what I'll call an amoeba zone defense. It's a matchup zone. So it's a zone zonal system, but it has man-to-man principles. So when anyone comes in your zone, they just would attack you viciously on a one-to-one basis. And then as soon as that was taken care of, they drop back into their space. And to me, that's what Livingston, to a large degree, was doing. They weren't man marking; they were kind of just zonally. But when you get into that area, they would just come at you. And I think that's a really difficult system to try and break down. To your point, when they just basically are coming in saying, we're parking the bus, 10 guys. You're talking about pack passes. If there's 5 feet in between their lines in a 5-4-1. I mean, they basically had the back 5 lining up right at the 18, and then maybe 5-10 feet until the second 4, and then the striker maybe a little bit, maybe 10 or 15 feet, 20 feet farther out. I mean, it just is really tough, and I think that risk-taking point you make is vitally important, because some of the more progressive clubs that are running advanced pressing systems like Salzburg. There was a video that's gone around quite a bit of Jesse Marsh, who's now an American, who's now at Leipzig. And when he was at Salzburg, basically talking about his principles of play and talking about how they press, and the principles are exactly what you say, was you take risk, and then you just swarm people with a counter press when it doesn't work. And to me, that it turns your failed creation chances into an attacking opportunity because of the coordinated nature and the effectiveness of your press. The difference is Salzburg's playing at a Champions League level. I think they're top of their group, and I think their front 3 are like 19, 20, and 21, and they're elite athletic people that press like lunatics, like Kyogo does. And this comes back to, I don't think that's Giakoumakis's game. I think you and I are going to do maybe another show discussion on Jota's role in that. And Abada's kind of been a mixed bag. And with that midfield, McGregor puts forth effort. He's not the most spatially, he's pretty good, but he's not the best at actually engaging and pressing. And Turnbull, we talked about last week, where he's started out really strong in that regard, and he's not kept up. Actually, Rogic has been the better player in that regard, and that's the big miss, right? Is Rogic when you're talking about those line splitting passes. So you didn't have a striker that was going to make big runs, and you didn't have the midfield creativity against a system that's going to be just brutal to try and break down anyway.
I mean, Jota, to be fair to him, by half time, is almost something. And what I'm doing here is I'm almost looking at things that you might think are negatives, and in this context of conversation that we're having about risk, these are positives. So if I say to you, Jota gave the ball away, missed 11 passes, easily the most in the team at half time, it's because he was trying more difficult passes. He failed with 6 crosses. He gave the ball away in the final third 7 times, and Ralston was not far behind him. So those two were trying to put risk into the game. So what I'm saying is these are negative stats in a sense, right? But they're positive indicators of trying to not play the safe game that the rest of their teammates seem to be playing. And so I'm giving those two credit really for trying to do something that wasn't the safe option, which is where we ended up.
Yeah, I'm in 100% agreement, and that's I've looked at Salzburg quite a bit just because they're such a fascinating club, and that's reflected in their data. I mean, that they're not at a high level of pass completion, for example, because they're taking more risks, and it's an optimization issue. Where's that line between, as you mentioned earlier, between possession and prior to us coming on, I just went back and looked out of curiosity. I mean, that the vast majority of games that we have had that approach that level of passes have had, kind of 3-0, 4-0 kind of results. There was a Dundee game in 18-19 in December. That's always one that I've cited, in even last season and the prior season, because McGregor was at the 6 on a rare occasion during that period when Brown was out injured. There's a couple of games against Hamilton mixed in there. So this is not, that level of passes and lateral and back passes was unusually high. And not only was it unusually high, it was odd to then not really create much out of it. So yeah, I had it up till, I didn't have it. StatsBomb has this really cool race chart that they put out, which shows cumulative XG throughout the game timeline. And as of the 88th minute, it was, let's see here, I had pulled it up, tried to do some, it was going into the 87th minute, it was 0.43 for Celtic and 0.06 for Livingston. So, I mean, that was, and it was on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 shots to create that. So again, we talk about, chance quality.
Yeah.
That's around 0.04 per chance, which to your point, I mean, those are pot shots blocked. So it was extraordinary.
But we didn't even take a volume of long shots.
No.
I mean, and to be fair, I think they did a good job. I mean, the centre halves,
blocking.
The centre halves never left the width of the 6-yard box, and the rest of the team never left the width of the 18-yard box. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity even to find an angle for a long shot. But anything would have been something. You hit a shot, it deflects off somebody, it bounces to somebody, and suddenly, I mean, I think there was a moment early on, maybe the first 5 minutes, where Abada got a shot in, but it was a foul, I think, in the box, and but he suddenly got the ball, just arrived at his feet, and these are the sort of things that happen when the ball ricochets. You get a bit lucky, like the goal against St Johnstone. You take a chance, and the guy misreads it, and it takes a funny bounce, and suddenly you're there. And that's where you want then your better players that are a bit quicker reaction, better positioning, better technique can then take advantage. But you've got to create that. I mean, fair play to them. They it was almost religiously, zealously. You could see their players almost looking, oh, I'm in front of the ball, right? I need to get behind the ball. And I was like, I don't care where any of the opposition are, I just have to get behind the ball. And as long as I'm behind the ball and I'm in shape, then I'm good. I mean, you've got to give them credit. I mean, it was quite masterful in some respects.
I absolutely. I mean, for what they set out to do. That's why I use the John Chaney analogy. I meant that in a flattering way because of my reverence for Chaney. And how difficult they would play that amoeba defense, and there's an art form in any kind of style, so people call it anti-football or whatever. Floyd Mayweather is one of the great boxers of all time, and was just a horrible boxer to watch unless you enjoyed a defensive fighter. A lot of people thought his fights were boring, me included. So yeah, there's beauties in the eye of the beholder, and I could see, for a club like Livingston to achieve what they were able to achieve, and limit Celtic the way they did, it's pretty extraordinary, actually. I think. So, and that's 2 games, 4 points. Not how we're going to go on to win the league.
But still, Celtic should have won, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, so let's just talk briefly then about. So what do we do? I mean, what outside of personnel changes, which could help alleviate maybe some of that issue? I think some of the rumor mill this week on the recruitment side of players out of Japan and. Ross at Boys Analytics always does a good job of putting videos out that we all watch to get hyped up with rumors. And you see the kind of one-touch passing that goes on with some of these guys, and I think that could help. maybe move the ball quicker in a one-touch way, which, not really Turnbull's strength, as we've talked about, not really Baton's strength, not really Abada's strength. So again, we start going down the list of people that in that selection of that team, that's probably not going to help. So outside of change of personnel, what do we do relative other than, the radical ideas, or maybe tweaking the system to get people in the mixer, so to speak, and embrace chaos? I mean, is that it? And so realistically, we're going to get Ange. We're going to see Ange do something like that.
I think we, again, patience is the watchword here. We have to take a step back and be realistic about where we've come from and where we're going. Is that at the beginning of the season, it was remarkable how quickly some of the attacking intent was translated into performance, into coherent, devastatingly quick, fast attacking play. A few blowouts there. The most one-sided 3-2 against Hearts you'll ever see. It should have been about 8-1.
Right.
And even overwhelming AZ, or a decent side at home. And the issue was that the defense was creaky and that the personnel kept changing, and we had youngsters thrown in there, etc. And then after the international break, we saw a shift in this system dynamics to a greater level of control and a greater level of solidity. We saw Hart, Starfelt, Carter Vickers being fairly safe, suddenly quite a safe-looking defensive axis at the back. We saw Ralston just going from strength to strength, and the midfield even was which we're worried about, the three of them, and aside from being, obviously the goals conceded away in Betis and Leverkusen, but since that sort of October period, in the month of October, there was just the goal at Aberdeen from a set piece, and then the goal that Hibs scored, and that was it. And in those games, even very few chances for the opposition. But it looked like we were getting that balance between solidity and control, but still having that attacking threat, because again, we weren't nicking games 1-0. We're scoring 2-3 goals in each game as well. So that's why this was a bit of a juddering halt. But I think it just shows you how far we've got to go in total squad, the total squad makeup, and the fit for the people to play the system that Postecoglou wants to play. And it shows how delicate any system is, and that just having the best players doesn't guarantee you. As I'm sure if Endo was here as a sort of secondary Manchester United fan, he knows better than most that you can't just throw a lot of expensive players together and hope that it all works out. And we talked about the midfield, and for me, this is the area that he needs to find the answer to. That I suspect tonight a midfield of Bitton, McGregor, and Turnbull will work out well, because we're playing away from home in Europe. It's a little bit safer. It's a little bit more controlling, and that's probably a good thing, because we're playing a decent side away from home in Europe. As we know, there's full of risk in those games. But again, home, in the next league game, a Dundee. What's that going to be like? Is it going to give Celtic enough midfield penetration and creativity? Now, maybe McGregor had an off day against Livingston, because his form, frankly, has been great this season. Turnbull has, I know he's an interesting case study, but he and we've said before, he does at least give you that set piece threat, even if he doesn't give you a lot of creativity from open play. So is it do we just put it down to a bad day at the office, or do we
Right.
I think one game is probably too early to throw the baby out. So I suspect we've talked about there are no good options in central midfield, and what I mean by that is Turnbull's really a 10. I suspect McGregor is probably our best 6, and all our 6s don't fit the system. So there's no good options. So this is probably, I still think this is probably the least worst option. Didn't prove itself to be so against Livingston, but I suspect we give it another go. I can't think of a better answer. I'm afraid.
So I looked through the StatsBomb data earlier, and it was interesting to me. Basically, the way I'm thinking about it is since the close of the transfer window, and I've kind of been using that as a Maginot line, so to speak, because of the exits of Edouard and Christie, and I think the obvious impact that kind of talent leaving would reasonably have, is basically the style of play is closer to, let's call it an 18-19 Rodgers system, and the results are actually from just a sheer kind of non-penalty XG differential perspective is closer to the 1920 team under Lennon, but with, I would argue, a lot less talent.
So that speaks to that, what I said to you about the mixture of the control.
Exactly.
The Rodgers team was high on control, low on thrills in the latter couple of years, whereas the Lennon team, in 1920 team, that was actually thrilling and productive.
Yeah, well, that's why I mentioned it, because I thought it was interesting. It fit with what you just said, but also it speaks to, conceding chances has not been an issue.
Latterly, no, not recently, no.
No, not at a domestic level. Even against Rangers, it was not like we got cut open, and so I think to your point, as you've been discussing, we've been a lot more sound in transition and at the back, because I would argue we're not playing quote unquote Ange ball. I think he's absolutely made significant adjustments, and McGregor even spoke to it in public. But the other number I kind of calculated since the close of the transfer windows, we're down less than 18 shots per game on average in those 8 games. And you just do simple math on kind of average quality chances. So the average quality on Saturday was not great because of how packed in they were. And if we're going to see a bunch of teams park the bus now, and we're going to face this issue, you're going to get to, because Livingston was basically useless when it came to the counterattack, and so it's a sliding scale with each team. Dundee United did not set up that way. They actually set up the play a little bit, and I think our non-penalty XG in that game was over 3. That was one of those games where it was just like, really unfortunate that we didn't get all 3 points. That was kind of a bad luck draw, so to speak, in from an XG perspective.
And their Marshall should have been sent off in the first half, so
right,
considerably upped our chances of winning.
Right. Yeah. So I guess my concern continues to be, and I don't think Saturday alleviated that. Was, are we going to get to the point of chance creation going forward that we're going to need to prevent dropping points? Because even on Saturday, Hart mishandled 2 balls that resulted in corners. So they really only had 2 chances, even theoretic chances, and they were both from corners. One of those can be scored, fluky. You know what I mean? It's just that's how a team like Livi. That's why I go back to giving Livingston credit. They had 3 chances to score in that game. They didn't really manifest in XG, and I saw which I'm a big fan of your series you've been doing with the Yorkshire Whistler, I guess it is, right? Is that what you call him?
Yes.
That's great. I love, just from a content perspective, I love the concept. But there was a collision in the box, right? And given who the referee was, who knows what kind of a decision could come out of that guy.
Which one? Do you mean the one early in the first half with Giacomakis and?
Oh no. I was more talking about Hart coming out for
the Joe Hart one.
Yeah. As they say, on another day, Madden gives a penalty for that, and it, it was close enough that in real time, had he done it, I mean, one side's going to be pissed and one side's, you know what I mean? Like it was one of those. I think even the gentleman that you're working with on reviewing these, it was one of those where, as an NFL fan, they'll say inconclusive, right? Depending on the, so whatever on the field, the call on the field stands, and it's not that necessarily that the call was right. It's just we don't have enough evidence to overturn it.
Yeah.
So
it wasn't ridiculously late. It was clearly the Hart was going for the ball, and it looked like the guy just got there a fraction before him. So it wasn't a ridiculous error. It was worth looking at. But
exactly.
You shouldn't be overturning it. Yeah.
Right. My point is more so it wouldn't be crazy for Madden or any Scottish referee to issue that as a penalty, and it wouldn't have been a crazy decision given the fact that you're having an actual qualified person look at it and say, depending on the angle, in slow-mo, so that's my point is it was a chance that could have broke against us, that could have resulted in a goal, right? So as much as we dominated that game in controlling the game, they still had 3 opportunities that if they had a little bit of luck, they could have scored. And we're gonna get that every game to a degree, some degree. I mean, the games that we're gonna have no shots against us, I think there was one game in the last 5 or 6 years where a team didn't have any shot against us domestically. So this goes back to that, are we gonna have enough chance creation with this controlled style to have a large enough spread where we're not dropping points? That's
So I mean, the quality of average XG per chance had gone up markedly this season. Had done. I've not gone back and really. I know you do like a six game rolling average, and maybe it's dropped a bit, and I've not looked at that, but it had been earlier in the season. That was one metric. Because what I found interestingly is that total shots. And again, this is an interesting thing. It's a bit of a sidebar here, but total number of shots seems to be a really bad predictor of anything, because I don't care whether it's Dyler, Rogers, Lennon, whether we're top of the league, bottom of the league, or middle of the league. We seem to average 16 shots a game. It doesn't seem to matter. It doesn't seem to matter who it is, and whether you think you're playing badly or well. It's about 16 shots a game. So I'm not sure that's a really good. I think it's a good metric at all, just on its own. I mean, it has dropped. We were averaging 17, and it's dropped to 14 over the last 6 games where we had better control, as it were. Right. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure there's a lot to read into that one thing. That's why I never really use one thing. It's usually that plus that plus something else, and you build a little bit of a kind of contextual, multi-dimensional view of something.
That's why I mentioned it, is because it's trending down a little bit, and average quality per chance is not really changing a lot, but it's ideally, if you're going to have number of chances come down, it would be because you're getting better chances, right? So your quality would go, because you really want to get above that 2 XG level. That's kind of the threshold. Is you start popping up against 2, and you limit chances to kind of sub 0.6 or around 0.6. You get into that 1.4, 1.5 XG non-penalty XG differential. Just normal variation. That's kind of the formula how you get to.
I understand what you're saying in theory, but the thing is, I kind of know where this is going, in the sense of you almost want to come up with a view that sort of said, when we were playing really well, this is what really well looked like, and if you can match these numbers, then we've got a high probability that we're going to do really well again. I don't think it's as simple as that, and the reason that it isn't is because it's just the intrinsic nature of football, right? Because it is such a low-scoring game. And one goal, can make a huge difference. One goal, that penalty going in, against Livingston, completely changes the narrative, the conversation after the game. Everything radically changes. The whole dimension of the league and the pressure, and how Rangers would have gone into their game against Motherwell would have changed as well. So just that one goal, and like you say, they had three opportunities, a free kick and a corner. They actually created a shot on goal from. And if one of those had gone in, mobilised header when he got to before Hart, somehow just gone in rather than just flown wide, etc. So And then you'd looked at that and said, and even if Celtic had an XG of 4, and you've lost 1-0, and it does happen just as likely as if you could win 1-0 off an XG of 0.7. And you know what I mean. So I think the low scoring nature of football will thwart any effort to have an absolute model of this is what good looks like, and you must have this. You must have this differential. You must at least have this number of shots. You must at least have this number of XG average per shot. I think that's a laudable thing to do at almost not at a theoretical level. I'm not dismissing it at all. I think it's a laudable thing to do to try and frame what does good look like. What does a good performance look like that we're happy with versus when are we getting a bit concerned? What are the triggers that fall below a certain threshold where we're, like you said, the differentials like not being over 1 XG for 10 games, right? We're pretty worried about that, you know. So that's all good, but I just think we'll never be absolute about it, because that ability of one goal to completely throw all the other numbers in the air is always present in a game of football, which is great. That's why it's so hard.
I'm 100% in agreement with you. In my mind, it's more so probabilistic, right? So I actually wrote a piece about this. It was in August or early September. This just goes back to my background in finance and financial markets. Streaming returns, sequencing. You know, when you link, you're doing arithmetic returns versus geometric, and there's all kinds of these fun concepts that you get into when you're just calculating performance, right? You have a portfolio of stocks and you say, what was my return? And most people would say, well, that's an easy question. Answer it. Well, it's not that easy, right? You might have had money coming in and out. When did that happen? Did you put money in and buy on a down day, the market was crashing and it rallied back up? And, so there's all these issues. Are you doing it arithmetically? Are you doing geometrically? Are you linking returns through time? All of these interesting things. So, one of the simple concepts is volatility, and not only the spread. I think and this is absolutely not in a one-off game. In a one-off game, it means nothing. Even within a 38-game season, that increases the importance of the probability, but you're still going to have fat tails, as we saw with Rangers last season. You're going to still have significant deviation. I've had discussions with people on Twitter about, expected points and that kind of thing. Anytime you have these mean reverting models, it was ascribed to Keynes. I don't think he actually said it, but it was, markets can stay irrational for longer than you can stay solvent, is the old saying, right? So everyone says, oh, things will revert. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, you have enough money. It's like playing the roulette table, and eventually it's going to hit black again. Well, yeah, but if you didn't size your bets properly and have an endless bank account,
and they found that people have found that in terms of, they were looking at in the English Premier League, and there was one particular team, I think it might have been Stoke City, but it doesn't matter, who were just adamant they were just on the wrong end of bad decisions time and time again. And what was amazing was just how long that sequence of bad luck could go on. It's the same with XG performance to the mean. XG performance, underperformance, which can be bad just down to bad luck, can go over us. It can see you relegated, and then the next season is again. You're still thinking, oh, it's going to revert one day. So yeah, absolutely, it's incredible how long these things can go on. Certainly longer than the patience of the average football fan.
Yeah. So
which isn't very long.
So when I talk about kind of optimizing to get that spread wider, because the flip side of this is when I wrote my piece back, it was like 2 months ago now, or a month and a half ago. That was under the guise of Ange Ball, which his track record was more volatile, meaning that he got that Marinos team to play at a very high level, but that came with some chaos, as we've seen, and that increased the volatility of his underlying performance, at least the team, and that has an inherent kind of that almost amplifies, at least this is my theory, the risk of deviation from something like expected points. So it's this issue of, I actually think, this is why I mentioned the Rodgers, that we're kind of mixing between the 18-19 Rodgers team and and the Lennon 1920 team, is we're getting a good spread now with more control in the game, which actually should increase the expected points correlation, right?
Yep.
So we should have less volatility deviating from, this is my theory anyway, from expected
No,
points.
I agree with you. Intuitively, I agree with that. And
Yeah.
it's like I don't know if it's true, but I imagined, and I've not checked this, that Lennon's teams, especially last year, had a lot more volatility. Like you could be like high XG one week and really low the next. Whereas I think with the way that the Postecoglou's team is developing, he seems like he's getting, like you say, much steadier than I thought would happen. Because I mean, let's be honest, you can only win 3 points once. You can only, there's no point having an XG of 12 and then 0 the next week. Try and share it around a little bit.
That, again, going back to that piece, I actually calculated the downside deviation. So again, this goes back to my training in markets. So you just look at the volatility only when it's going down, right? Because upside volatility we all love, right? We all love when our stock goes up 300% in a straight line. Give me more of that volatility. I don't want it going down by 50%. That's the volatility I don't like. So how do you measure downside volatility? And this is where I hypothesized about 2 years ago that Liverpool were probably optimizing with that kind of framework in mind, because if you look at their downside deviation versus Man City, it's a significant amount lower. Right. So again, Man City typically averages a better spread in their performance level. If you look at a full season, their XG differential is going to be wider than even when when Liverpool won the league. Man City had the better underlying performance level, but their volatility was higher.
Yeah, they were absolutely hammering teams, but they're not overperforming in the big games. Whereas Liverpool were pretty consistent. Liverpool would win 2-1 against Man City, and then they'd go and beat Brighton 2-1. It was like it was kind of consistent,
more
but just enough, but steady, but sustainable. Whereas Man City would be like 6-0, 7-0, 8-0, and then you draw. So it's
Well, now that I've put everyone to sleep on that esoteric concept, so let's real quick. We want to mention something, and then we're going to get on to Ferencvaros quick. We're not going to get into that too much because this is going to be dated as soon as we put it out with the game coming up. But one interesting aspect of the game was Kyogo coming in as a number 10. And it was kind of, Y-Scout had it as like a 4-4-1-1, but, that's like a 4-2-3-1, basically, depending on where the wingers are at. So I thought that was interesting. So what did you think?
I'm coming to the conclusion that as much, we love him and he's got some incredible attributes, but I think he's going to be one of these players that has some attributes that are like here around movement, off the ball, pace, pressing ability, finishing, etc. And he's going to have some attributes that are down here, and they're going to be around. I don't think he's a creative player at all. He doesn't ever look to beat a player. He doesn't have a trick. He doesn't even try and nudge the ball and just uses his pace to get by a player. If he gets it, he tends to just give it, recycle it. So the notion that he could be that 10 or be even creative wide player, I just don't think we'll get a lot of productivity out of him. I think he looks to me like somebody you just want to be feeding balls through, and he's just going to scare the hell out of defenders, because defenders hate players like him. And that's really going to be his skill set. He's not going to be an all-round Larsson-esque striker. Unfortunately, it's just Hartson was a nice combination of size and incredible finishing ability. He wasn't just a big lump. Kyogo is going to be all about the movement, all about the pace, and his finishing is fantastic. And they're great attributes, and people pay a lot of money for those attributes. But I don't see him being. I don't see that creativity you had with Edouard, the quick feet and then the release. I just don't see that, unfortunately.
I agree. I think even you've seen that. Well, first of all, when I did his kind of what I call kind of my data scouting when we sign new players, and I benchmark them at a peer group level, and not only usually in their league that they're playing in, but then I do it with kind of their age-based peer group across senior leagues. Was his dribbling stats did not look great. You know what I mean? For a guy who played a lot at the wing on an attacking team, he just didn't beat guys one-on-one all that much. And I think that's translated even at the Scottish level, which, fair amount of the teams have lower level talent than he was facing in Japan. And he just doesn't smoke. Like Jota just smokes guys. He's fun to watch. He takes people one-on-one and just absolutely just blows by them. Whereas, I think Kyogo's not that kind of player.
I don't know if you picked up on Twitter, excuse me, somebody that you should all follow, a young lad, Owen Brown, very talented analyst. Definitely give him a follow. And he actually showed, and again, this is where you got to be careful with data, and I think he was being a little bit sort of cheeky, but making an interesting observation as well, was that in terms of players, that this is something you do, James, with benchmarking, players that look like Kyogo was actually Firmino at Liverpool. They were incredibly similar on some stats, right. And he showed the ones that were similar. Firmino's involvement in the game is far larger than Kyogo's involvement in the game. For example, just number of touches and what have you. But it's an I thought that was a fascinating one to think about.
I follow Owen. I know Owen a little bit, and I echo your comments. He's a great follow, excellent analyst. I missed that somehow, so I'll have to go back through his timeline and check that out. Well, let's real quick here. We're coming up on an hour, so we want to get out of here around the hour mark. So Ferencvaros, how are you feeling going into this?
Well, Celtic away in Europe. Celtic away in Europe. So it's like, I mean, to me, if we get through and have some form of European football after Christmas, I think that's more than I expected when the season began. When we sat here in June, July, thinking, "Oh my God, what chance have we got?" So any form of European football is going to be good. I mean, clearly, if you think about what did we learn from the first game against them, if I look back at that game, we got a bit lucky in the 3rd minute when Carter Vickers probably should have given away a penalty, and then we didn't create a lot. In fact, we were down on XG at half time, even though we had a lot of control.
Yeah, the first half was brutal.
Yeah, first half was terrible. And then they did what they had tried to do a few times in the first half, where they try and get as many players forward in the wide areas as they can to create that overload. And the right fullback, Wingo, great name for a right fullback, Wingo. Wingo, he's gone. He was out of position, and that gave Jota the space to put Kyogo through, and that little bit of chaos in the game, which was completely out of step with what had gone before, gave us the lead, which then changes the complete dynamic. We then miss a penalty, which seems to be Celtic's default in when it really matters. And then obviously got the late goal. They tired badly. They didn't look as fit a team as we did. I don't think they're used to being they're used to controlling games, obviously in their own league as well. But it's Celtic away in Europe. They looked a competent side. There was some danger there. There was definitely a little bit jeopardy in the game. I hope Celtic win. If we get a draw, I'll be delighted as well. Anything really, but ultimately, I think if we get through and are still playing some kind of European football after Christmas, that to me is, I think that's below par. As in, we're ahead of ourselves to where I thought we were going to be.
Yeah, I'll add 2 things. One, Kevin McCluskey is a Celtic supporter who lives in Hungary. And he's been doing a good job. So I think it's Magyar Boy. Yeah. So he's underfollowed on Twitter, so I retweeted him earlier today. So anyone that follows me, you can check it on my timeline. But he did a good job of previewing the game. And again, because he follows Hungarian football and Ferencvaros, I guess their striker may not. The guy who started Mame or whatever his name was.
the Moroccan. He scored a lot of goals for them. Yeah.
So he his fitness I think is questionable, and then their goalie, whoever their backup. Well, he played against us last season. I forget, but he wasn't on. There was a disciplinary issue internal, so he was dropped off of their European squad. So
the goalkeeper, did you say? Because their goalkeeper
no, good. The other striker.
The other striker.
Bowling,
right?
Yeah. So yeah, he's not on their squad for Europe. So there could be a little thin going forward if that's the case. But yeah, I think I just think it's going to be fascinating. Is it going to be Welsh? Is it going to be and with Beaton in at the 6, or because again we just don't have that many options. Could McCarthy come in, or if you put Beaton back in at center back, it's back to this issue of what's the least bad option, because poor Welsh hasn't seen a game since I don't know, I can't remember the last time. Rangers maybe, or I don't even remember exactly. So
yeah, he'd been playing well. Yeah, he did nothing to get dropped really, but for to the kids. So I've got no worries about Welsh coming in that sense. I just their main threat, say, was the fullback area. Wingo was bombing forward. The guy on the left, Civic, he was decent. The guy in midfield,
the Norwegian guy was pretty good. The number 10.
Yeah, he didn't. I know he looked busy, but he didn't do a lot.
Right.
It was the Hungarian guy, Veshai, the deeper player. He progressed the ball through the lines pretty well. Actually, he was easily their best kind of pack passer on the night. Right. So yeah, listen, they're going to be decent, but yeah, I think with our newfound control, yeah, I don't know, a 2-0 win. Why not?
So I'm curious to see if we revert a little bit to Ange ball at the European stage, just because there will be more back and forth. The game will be a little more open. I'm hoping that we get Jota, Kyogo, and I'd love to see Forrest start, but he may not be ready yet. If not, then I'd prefer Johnston in a game that's going to be a little bit more open like that.
Yeah.
And I think if that's the case, then even with that midfield, I'd be pretty confident that Kyogo could catch them at some point in transition, kind of like we did last time. But yeah, I'd be a little bit surprised if we don't concede at least one. But
as I say, I think for me, stay in the game. I don't mind us being a little bit conservative if it means control and not giving up many chances. Because as I say, I thought we looked by far the fitter team towards the end of the first game, and if that's not going to have changed radically in the last couple of weeks. So if we can just stay in the game, and then late on, we've now got options on the bench. We've got Johnson, Forrest, Giamakis, and whoever to come on, and actually, against a tiring team, that's a good option. These are good options.
Yeah, the last thing I'll throw in, my second point is I think post holiday, even if it's in the conference league, I think there's a certain financial reality to this now. Dropping down into that competition, I think reasonably you could expect us to win the first tie, and so that would mean 2 more home games.
Yeah, and that differential's not the differential between the Europa League and the conference isn't huge, right, is it? In terms of
So if you get into that last kind of 32, or I forget where we drop in, I think it's the last 32. But even above and beyond that, the gate money. So you're talking about upwards of another $1 million per game.
Well, it's a bit more than that. It's about you got costs, but yeah, you're looking at 2-3 million a game income, and then you've got your costs. So probably clearing a couple of million for a home game, full house. And then I think if Celtic get through and play some form of European football, and let's say the Rangers don't, I think maybe that even might shift the television distribution a little bit in our favour as well. So there'll be a little bit more of that coming. So it's all definitely worth doing in terms of. I don't believe it will be in Postecoglou's nature to say, "Oh well,
I agree."
He'll put out the strongest team he thinks will win the game. Yeah.
I just my point is more so as we head into the kind of the January transfer window. The financial picture is tight enough. I mean, there's no issues, but we're not going to go out and blow a wad of 10 million in January. Right. So adding a couple more, a reasonable expectation of a couple of more million coming in, worst case, meaning that you get at least one knockout tie. I think that could be meaningful as far as how much risk they're willing to take financially in the January window. So I think I just thought I'd mention it because back to when we first started the show, as far as prioritizing competitions. So I think it is, meaningfully important that we get through at least to the Conference League. And if for nothing else, we'd like to try and win a knockout tie, even though if it's in Conference League. First time in 17 years, that would be nice. And the money won't hurt either. So, okay. Well, we're up over the hour now. I lied. So sorry, I was derelict in my duty in getting over to the comments. So everyone that did comment, apologies. Appreciate the involvement.
I'll go through them. I'll try and go through them later. Yeah.
I'm not sure if the live stream ends up posting. So yeah, if you any questions that you have, post underneath the link on YouTube, or hit us on Twitter. We usually try to respond.
Definitely would respond on Twitter. If you respond on YouTube, I will. I usually try and get to them. It might be a few days, but I'll get there.
Right. So appreciate the interaction, everyone, and look forward to talking to everybody next week. Have a good week, Alan. Enjoy the game.
And you take care.